Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Lights, Camera, Nonsense, where we give you all the latest movie magic you may have missed. I'm Nick Simmons.
And I'm Zach Smith.
And let's roll into the previews. This is going to be a different version of the podcast. It's not even really a podcast itself. We decided we didn't want to really kind of do a normal podcast and basically pretend that things in the world are not happening because they are.
We thought it would not be. We shouldn't be taking away time from the message that is going on right now, and that's that Black Lives Matter.
Right.
But we did still feel like we should use our platform to help push for change and help provide resources. So that's what we're going to do here today. It's not, like Nick said, it's not a normal podcast. We're just here to relay some info for you, some movies and some other things that we think are good for viewing, especially for white people who need kind of information on how their white privilege has gotten them to where they are right now, in contention with what is happening to Black Americans all across the globe and has been happening to them for centuries now.
Yeah, 400 years.
Yeah.
It's sad to see the state of affairs that we are experiencing, and I don't mean from any point of view other than what people are having to go through on a street level basis. We have people trying to express their rights through protests, peaceful protests, and you have they're trying to demonstrate police brutality and how much it's prevalent in at least American society. It's not just American society; it's world society. It's all over the world, and it's a beautiful thing to see. And like Zach said, we're going to be using our platform to hopefully recommend some things to help educate you on Black history. Just great Black filmmaking. I want to just get this off my chest, Zach. I didn't kind of brief you on this. I have said in the past that certain genres of films, certain films in and of themselves are really they're not for me. Like they're not like I'm not part of the audience that that film was made for. And I've always felt in the back of my head, but kind of just blew it off as an excuse that, that's just one reason not to go see that movie. But it's limited my view on great filmmaking, on great filmmakers, great actors, and great performances. As I will mention a couple of movies that I have seen in the last 9 days that have not only educated me, but have opened my eyes to a lot of history that I've missed. I've honestly just skipped over because I thought that it wasn't a discussion for me. That was really more of a discussion for the audience it was intended for, and that's
right. Yeah. Well, and the sad thing is, I think we all have fallen prey to that at some point as white Americans. We think, even if we're allies in the sense of we're not throwing up all lives matter sign or anything like that, if we're vehemently against racism in our own lives, we still need to be loud and anti-racist.
Right.
Otherwise, we're just going to keep getting stuck in the same cycle. So it's important that we do recognize the shortcomings of ourselves and aim to be better allies and better proponents for our Black brothers and sisters. So hopefully with some of the info we're going to be giving out today, that will not only help us, but help others as well. And something to keep in mind is that a lot of this stuff has been around. So, maybe you just haven't been paying attention to it up till now, but now that you are, it's important to strive to be better than what you were and to put your best foot forward so you can help those who have been suffering and have been unjustly targeted in our fucked up system. To where they have to be scared about jogging to be scared about bird watching, to be scared about playing in a park with a toy gun, like a fucking water gun, you know?
Yeah.
And that's something that we as white people will never understand, that fear. So we need to do the most that we can to understand as much as we can.
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, if you want to roll into
Yeah.
to our suggestions here. I don't know what you got.
I started off with a list of movies that I thought would help better educate me. I was just kind of going off of movies that I know I missed that were not only award contenders, but that wasn't the reason why I picked it. It was because they told a story of a history that was always something that either didn't interest me in high school when we were researching it, or it wasn't a story of a history. It wasn't my being a white man's history, and it was something that I skipped over. I mean, the fact that some of these movies weren't nominated for awards, and that was a reason why I missed them during award season or what have you. It's there's no excuse. So let me just go ahead and jump into it. I actually watched, and it's actually made free on all digital platforms for the month of June, is Just Mercy.
Just Mercy, yeah.
Which was directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, who also directed Short Term 12, starring Brie Larson. And this film stars Michael B. Jordan, Jamie Foxx, and Brie Larson. And a quick synopsis for the movie is, after graduating from Harvard, Bryan Stevenson heads to Alabama to defend those wrongly condemned or those not afforded proper representation. One of his first cases is that of Walter McMillan, who was sentenced to die in 1987 for the murder of an 18-year-old girl, despite evidence proving his innocence. In the years that follow, Stevenson encounters racism and legal and political maneuverings as he tirelessly fights for McMillan's life. It's a very powerful film. It came out very late last year in the award season, but kind of got overlooked for the most part when it got released wide in January. And then, COVID happened. Great film. Watched it just a couple of days ago. That's my first one. Do you want to popcorn and kind of go back and forth, Zach?
You can go down yours, and then
okay.
I'll have mine.
Okay. The next film I wanted to mention is it also stars Michael B. Jordan, and it's Fruitvale Station, directed by Ryan Coogler, who also directed Black Panther. Yeah. Yep. It also stars Octavia Spencer, and the film tells the story of Oscar Grant III, a 22-year-old Bay Area resident who crosses paths with friends, enemies, and strangers on a tragic New Year's Eve in the year 2008. And it's based on a true story, and it's a very powerful film, and I highly recommend anybody who's watching to stop what they're doing. It's okay, honestly.
It's intercut with a bit of real-life footage. Mm-hmm. It's if you didn't already know the story of Oscar Grant and how he was murdered by BART station attendants or whatever they were, officers, I guess. It's heartbreaking. That and that's a normal occurrence that details. So yeah, definitely give that one a watch as well as Just Mercy for sure.
For sure. The next one I have. There's two filmmakers, especially more recently, who have been impactful in not only the black community but black filmmaking at large. I'll mention both of them today. Spike Lee, of course. Mm-hmm. I'll mention a whole bunch of his, but the other is Ava DuVernay, who also directed A Wrinkle in Time and the upcoming DMZ, which is based off that comic book I mentioned to you, Zach, and When They See Us, which is a series I'll mention here in a little bit.
Yeah, it's a Netflix miniseries.
Yep. Selma is it stars David Oyelowo. I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher these names, and Carmen Ejogo, and it basically follows the Civil Rights Act of 1964, legally desegregating the South. Discrimination was still rampant in certain areas, making it very difficult for blacks to register to vote. In 1965. An Alabama city became the battleground in the fight for suffrage. Despite violent opposition, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And his followers pressed forward on an epic march from Selma to Montgomery, and their efforts culminated in President Lyndon Johnson signing the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So it's a very powerful and very important part of American history. and I don't know why I missed out on seeing this movie. I'll just go ahead and continue on. The next movie is The Hate You Give, which just recently came out a couple of years ago.
Great movie. Yep. Directed
by George Tillman Jr. and starring Amandla Stenberg, Regina Hall, and Anthony Mackie. The film follows Amandla Stenberg's character Star, who witnesses the fatal shooting of her childhood best friend Khalil at the hands of a police officer. Now facing pressure from all sides of the community, Star must find her voice and stand up for what's right. It's a very powerful film as well.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention this movie, although it's more action-oriented than it is drama-oriented, but I don't feel like that's to the detriment of the film, just because of the message that it tries to tell. But Black and Blue, which just came out last year, is directed by Dion Taylor, who also directed The Intruder and Meet the Blacks, and stars Naomi Harris and Tyrese Gibson. Naomi Harris plays a rookie New Orleans police officer who is forced to balance her identity as a black woman after she witnesses 2 corrupt cops committing murder. Definitely those moral choices that are made in that film are very prevalent to what's going on right now, especially for black police officers. Another film is Get Out, directed by Jordan Peele, from Key and Peele, and who also wrote Keanu, although this was his directorial debut, right? Get Out.
Yes, yeah, it was his first one. And then it was followed by Us, which was also a great movie.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I've talked about that movie on several occasions. Yeah, Get Out is great.
If you haven't heard of Get Out, haven't watched Get Out, which is baffling to me, it stars Daniel Kaluuya and Allison Williams. The film is about a young black man who visits his white girlfriend's parents for the weekend, where his simmering uneasiness about their reception of him eventually reaches a boiling point. We won't get too much into spoilers, but it definitely takes a turn. And while it may be satire in some places, it's very realistic in how black people have to deal with some white people.
I think it's important because it details a different side of racism, and that it's racism from a glorification standpoint. Right. So sometimes racism is not, chanting and violence and burning crosses on lawns. Sometimes it's just as insidious but quieter. And that's something we also need to be mindful of as well, creeping up when you're not aware.
Right. The next content I was going to mention is the When They See Us series, which I had mentioned before, created by Ava DuVernay, who stars Asante Black, Khalil Harris, Ethan Heresy, and Marquise Rodriguez. The series covers the events of the Central Park 5. Yeah, teens from Harlem who become trapped in a nightmare when they're falsely accused of a brutal attack in Central Park, and it's based on the true story of the Central Park 5.
Definitely give this one a watch also, because our fucking president right now is at the center of that. And even after that those 5 young men were acquitted, they were found of no wrongdoing, he was still calling for the death penalty. And that's the America we live in right now, that someone who can call for the death of 5 black young men after being shown innocent is now our president. And that's just the truth. That's the history that we need to confront in white America, because we have the ability. Both of us are we're both left leaning. Maybe one of us more than the other, I think.
Hey, no.
But we have the privilege to be like, Trump's a fucking asshole, and he's deteriorating the country, and we're gonna fucking die essentially because of him. But we don't have to deal with the ramifications of the things he does on a race basis. We can sit here and talk about, how awful everything that he does is, but at the end of the day, we are not directly feeling that effect because we're white men. you know?
Right.
And so, definitely watch that miniseries and take into account how ingrained that racism is, that we can now turn around and elect that monster, you know?
Yeah. And keep him, and how he stays in office because of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
It's the miniseries is just as important and as I don't know why I'm dodging on the word right now. It's just as relevant today as when the Central Park 5 case was still going on. So it's something to definitely think about and definitely to ponder. It's 4 episodes, I believe, on Netflix. It's a miniseries. Yeah. So it's worth watching. You don't have to watch the next season of Friends.
They also do a I don't know if it's included in the normal run. I think the miniseries might just be 3 episodes, and they have a special episode at the end of it, in which they interview. I believe it's Oprah interviewing the real Central Park 5, and it's definitely give that a watch too.
Moving on. You might get a kind of I might get a strange look from you just because you had started watching this series and then you had kind of like gotten off of it just because you were kind of in other series. But the Watchmen 2020 series, while it is a sequel to the comic book from the 1980s by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbs, is it Gibbons or Gibson?
Gibbons, I think.
Gibbons, okay. The series on HBO was created by Damon Lindelof, who also created Lost and The Leftovers, and stars Regina King and Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. The series is set in an alternate history where mass vigilantes are treated as outlaws, as secrets are uncovered about the past, and not everything is as it seems. Watchmen embraces the nostalgia of the original groundbreaking graphic novel of the same name while attempting to break new ground on its own. It takes place in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where, while it may be set in an alternate history, the Tulsa Massacre still happened.
It's how it opens.
And it's how it opens. And it's very scary to see because I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I had never heard of that. I had never even... No one had ever told me about that when I was growing up.
Well, and that's the thing, too, is, we see this time and time again throughout our history as a country, is these acts of just horrendous violence towards black communities, which are then promptly either brushed away because they're seen as lesser human beings, or they're just straight up buried. There wasn't a full report until I think 2001 that detailed just how massive the loss of life is. And even then, I believe the reports were they were minimized.
Right. It was on the low
end. It was
believed
that those numbers, that loss of life, was much, much higher than they could find. That's 2001. That's within less than 20 years.
Yeah. It's a quick side note. It is a science fiction series and it is a continuation of a comic book, but the way that they retell history and the way that they bring up a certain character's history, I think is handled very well, especially in one specific episode. I couldn't give you the number or the name of the episode, but I just highly recommend that series because it definitely pulls the veil over that which a lot of people don't know. Like the Tulsa Massacre, like I said, I had never heard of it until I had seen that show, and it's ridiculous. But moving on, If Beale Street Could Talk, directed by Barry Jenkins, who also directed Moonlight, and starring Kiki Lane and Stephen James, and Regina King, again. The story is about a young woman embracing her pregnancy while she and her family set out to prove her childhood friend and lover innocent of a crime he didn't commit. This was just one of those films that I told myself I could watch it, but I feel like I wouldn't really get into it because it's not for me, and that's ridiculous. It was when I was typing this up, it was just one of those films that came to mind. I don't know. It really bothered me that I skipped out on something like this. Another film I actually have seen is 42, directed by Brian Helgeland, who also directed A Knight's Tale and a Legend, and stars Chadwick Boseman and Harrison Ford. And the film takes place in 1947, where Jackie Robinson becomes the first African-American to play in Major League Baseball in the modern era, where he was signed by the Brooklyn Dodgers and faces considerable racism in the process. Another film that opened my eyes to a lot of racism that happens not only in popular culture and Hollywood, but in sports as well. It's prevalent everywhere. Racism is everywhere, and racists suck. So, fuck you, racists. Yep. Mm-hmm. Moving on. Going back into Black history, I want to mention Harriet, which came out last year, and directed by Casey Lemons, who also directed Eve's Bayou and Black Nativity, and stars Cynthia Erivo and Leslie Odom Jr. The film tells the extraordinary tale of Harriet Tubman's escape from slavery and transformation into one of America's greatest heroes, and whose courage and ingenuity and tenacity freed hundreds of slaves and changed the course of history. A movie I skipped out on just because I thought that I knew everything about Harriet Tubman and about the Underground Railroad, and clearly I didn't. It was nominated for many. I believe Best Original Song. Was that the only thing it was nominated for?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And the last film I wanted to mention was Black Klansman, directed by Spike Lee.
Yeah.
He most recently came out with Da 5 Bloods, which was on Netflix.
Is that out? I thought that was the 12th that dropped.
Is it? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. This whole month has run together, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that comes out on the 12th.
The 12th.
Yes, that is going to be a Netflix movie, yeah.
Right. He's also known, of course, for Do the Right Thing, Malcolm X, Inside Man, Miracle at St. Anna, Old Boy. He's had a huge, long history of being not only in Hollywood, but being a prevalent black voice in Hollywood. And, he's known for it. Black Klansman, most notably because it starred a true story and starring John David Washington and Adam Driver, that follows Ron Stallworth, an African-American police officer from Colorado Springs, Colorado, who successfully manages to infiltrate the local Ku Klux Klan branch with the help of a Jewish surrogate who eventually becomes its leader.
It's a dark comedy.
Right.
But it's still very much based on the center of systemic racism. Ron Stallworth is the first black cop in Colorado Springs. And he has to deal with the racism from not only outside influences like the KKK, but also within the very structure that is supposed to protect people, but it does not treat black citizens the same way. In fact, it will vilify them on a regular basis. And this is still going on. So it's still very much prescient.
Yeah. Prescient, relevant. I always miss out on those words. I, for some reason, confuse them. And anyway, that was my list of movies. Zach, did you have anything else to add?
You hit a lot of what I had, but I also just want to bring attention to a couple other things. First, Criterion, their streaming service,
Criterion Collection.
Yeah,
I think is what it's called.
It's something like that. And it's Criterion Collection, but not like it's just a handle or something like that. But they've lifted the paywall for almost all of their either films from black filmmakers or films that capture the essence of being black in America. So definitely great resource to go and look at. They have some amazing documentaries in there that I would highly recommend checking out. Also on the documentary front, I would recommend checking out 13th, which is also directed by Ava DuVernay. That's on Netflix. It came out in 2016, and it details the disparities in race that is within the industrial prison complex. And how even since the 13th Amendment, black Americans have still had to deal with a system that very much targets them to put them in prison and essentially brings them back into slavery. There's a statistic that 1 in every 17 white Americans will serve time in prison. Comparatively, 1 in every 3 black Americans will spend some time in prison in their lifetime. And it's definitely give it a watch. It's depressing, but it should spur you to action is the point of this. Because if you can watch something like that and how biased and broken a system is, to stand by and let that continue is unfeasible. Yeah. So give it a watch. I would also recommend, if maybe you're someone who's having trouble coming to terms with the fact that they do have white privilege, I would give Do You Wonder Who Fired the Gun a watch. It came out in 2017. The director, Travis Wilkerson, his grandfather committed a hate crime and murdered a black man. So he is going through history and talking to people to understand what exactly happened with that. And by the end of it, he has to confront the fact that he is complicit in a system that still very much undervalues black Americans, despite the fact that he himself has not done anything outwardly racist.
Where can people watch this? I'm sorry, I don't mean to.
I think it's. I know it's available on Amazon. Okay. I don't think it's available to stream anywhere. Just for as part of a subscription. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick.
Okay.
It looks like it's only available on Amazon Prime to rent. But that being said, do not let $5 dissuade you from seeking out resources. And now that being said, I think you should probably look at resources from Black Americans and people who have actually legit suffered from the way our system has handled their lives. But as a resource for confronting your own white privilege, I think this is a very good watch. So yeah, maybe just think about tossing $5 down for a learning experience, because the growth that you would have ideally is worth way more than $5. And the fact that you can help save people's lives, just so they don't have to worry about being discriminated against as they have been for so many years. So those were the documentaries I had. You hit everything else that I had down. I do want to take a moment to point to where you can also donate. If you don't want to be a supporter on Patreon for us, which, I think honestly your money is more well spent going directly to those who are campaigning for differences on the street.
Much better cause than us. I agree.
Pushing for legal representation and stuff like that. So I'm going to run down a couple of these, and I implore you to research them and seriously think about donating, because they do a lot of good. I'm going to start with the first one that I donated to, which was it's Campaign Zero, and they have an offshoot called 8 Can't Wait. Now, Campaign Zero collects data to work towards reducing police violence. Specifically, in the 8 Can't Wait kind of folder, they work to ban chokeholds and strangleholds. They require de-escalation from police officers. They require warning before shooting. And they also require that the officer on the scene exhaust all alternatives before shooting. Also, with this comes with the duty to intervene, which basically means if there are 2 officers in a situation and one of those officers is committing a crime or a racial-based injustice, that the other officer has the duty to intervene. Otherwise, that they will also be held liable for what happens to that person in custody. They also want to ban shooting at moving vehicles. We've had several instances in which police officers have fired at moving vehicles, regardless of whether or not they know that even one of those people in those vehicles is who they're looking for and is actually a criminal or a violent offender. And that's the thing with a lot of these crimes that disproportionately affect African Americans or black people, is that doesn't even have to be a violent crime. George Floyd committed no violent crime. They thought he was writing a bad check, and they killed him in the street for it. Eric Garner, a couple years back, was confronted for selling loose cigarettes, which was a policy set in place, a law set in place by tobacco companies because they want to make sure that you get addicted on their shit. So this man was killed because he's selling a cigarette for 50 cents. That's disgusting.
It's ridiculous.
So, and all that to say is that the violence being perpetuated against our black communities is not in line with their offenses, if they're even offending. But getting back to the "It Can't Wait," they also require a use of force continuum, which is in line with the exhausting all alternatives, in that whenever they're using a weapon, whether that be mace or a gun, they should make their actions flow in comparison to what they are being approached with. So no use of excessive force. And then they also require comprehensive reporting. So all of these things are things that you can donate to help push forward in legislation now. I was looking at some of Texas stuff because that's where we're based, and we are only implementing about 3 of these. Which, if you know Texas, isn't that much of a surprise, but there's definitely room to grow, and we need to make our voices heard and push our money not into a system that is systemically holding black people down, but into a system that is looking to help raise them to equality. So I would definitely give a look at Campaign Zero and It Can't Wait. They're also working towards ending for-profit policing and demilitarization. They're looking at reducing strings attached to police union contracts, which, if you're unaware, are a huge problem in terms of protecting police in matters of aggressive force, to the point where police officers are able to review all of the evidence in a case that's filed against them before they have to make a statement, which I wish everyone got that sort of treatment. But hey, I guess there we go. You can also look into donating to the Mass Defense Committee or the National Lawyers Guild. They provide legal support for protesters. So anyone that has been arrested in any of the protests that are going on now, these are some people that are helping with that. And I know a lot of people have been donating to the Minneapolis Defense Fund, I believe, which is, that was that was the big one that got pushed at the start of bringing attention to George Floyd's murder. But they have gotten so much support that they are now asking you to look at other avenues. So this would be one of those avenues. There's also the Anti-Police Terror Project. They support black families who have been affected by police violence, and they document abuse of power and connect those affected with legal resources and counseling. So it's kind of a catch-all. You have the legal counseling, and then you also have something that probably gets overlooked quite a bit from those who are affected by police violence, and that's therapy. You're in a situation in which you have to respond a certain way, and even if you do, you're liable to get shot. And I can't imagine
that affects you
as a white person. I will never understand the kind of terror I feel or that they feel going through something like that. You know, the most I'm ever going to feel is I don't want to pay this speeding ticket I'm getting pulled over for because I was actually speeding, not because my taillight was broken or because they thought I might go faster. So definitely look into them. You also have the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. They focus on civil rights for Black Americans with advocacy, litigation support, and educational outreach, as well as scholarship opportunities. So this is a way to support Black communities not only in times of grief and hardship, but also in times of lifting them up and giving them ample opportunity that is not afforded to them in normal times. The Loveland Foundation, they provide financial assistance and resources for Black women and girls seeking therapy. So again, therapy is a very important tool and is often overlooked, and one that focuses especially on Black women and girls who often get overlooked even in race issues. So
that's actually who I chose to donate our Patreon subscriptions to. So
yeah, great group to look into. There's also the Know Your Rights Camp. It was founded by Colin Kaepernick. They run camps to educate and empower Black and brown youth. So these are camps that tell them these are your rights. If you get stopped on the street, do not let them push you. It is invaluable for children in Black and brown communities to know what is afforded to white youth that they have to fight for. But they have to know their knowledge because they have to combat with that knowledge. They're not just afforded a free pass. Like, oh, that's all right, white high school kid, you can keep on smoking that joint. Whereas
it's the fact that they have to even learn this at all.
Oh yeah, it's terrible. It's disgusting. But it's the hard truth. And until we find a system that is not as militarized and as prejudiced against a portion of this country, then these are the systems that we have to work within. Now, that being said, there is movement right now to defund police. And before you get up in arms about the idea of defunding the police, I would highly recommend looking into that as well. Defunding the police does not mean getting rid of all police officers and having anarchy in the streets. What it means is replacing the system that obviously does not work with a system that is more in line with how they should serve communities. And that's all communities, not just Black communities, but all communities. And the last one I have here is Communities United Against Police Brutality. They advocate for those affected by police violence. They push for reform and accountability programs, and they educate communities about issues inherent in the justice system. So again, another great resource and learning tool for those who are so often targeted for being a different skin color, a different tone. Again, I would highly, highly implore you to look into these. Think about throwing a couple dollars here and there. If you can't, there are other resources out there where you can donate time, you can donate energy, you can donate. There's a streaming playlist going around in which they collect revenue from just the ads. Look these up. Just because, and maybe it's a little hard for you to spare the change, and I understand that, but there are ways to be a supporter without putting a dime anywhere. But if you can, do that, because the only way that things are going to change, the way that things are going to be fixed to the way that they should be, is if we push for it. If we keep playing this game of, well, I'm not racist, so I'm okay, and don't start being anti-racist, and don't start pushing for change in our system, then we're going to keep having George Floyd's, we're going to keep having Breonna Taylor's, we're going to keep having Tamir Rice's,
Ahmaud Arbery.
Yeah, Philando Castile. the names go on and on. Sandra Bland was just in Dallas a couple years ago. They never reopened her case. She's just gone because the police can get away with it, and we allow them to get away with it. So it's time.
Do your part.
It's time to stop only considering you as an ally and start acting on it. March if you feel comfortable. Be safe, obviously. Casey and I went to one yesterday. Literally everyone is wearing masks. I wore gloves, and everybody was keeping good distance apart. So everyone there is doing what they can to not only be safe, but to make their voices heard. And that's what's important, is to push for change and to scream and yell and thrash until they fucking get it and stop killing people in the streets just because they're black. That's all I got.
No, yeah. Thank you so much. All links to all of the things that Zach mentioned are going to be in the description down below. Do what you can. Do your part. There's simply no way that you can't support this movement if you are supporting this movement. Whether it be donating to the right organizations or streaming a YouTube playlist on your phone or your TV. It's just that simple.
If you ever wondered,
do your part.
If you ever wondered what you would do in a situation where civil rights, human rights, basic living rights, the right to fucking breathe was infringed upon, if you ever wondered how that would happen because you were reading in a fucking textbook, this is what you would do. So either put up or shut up.
Right. This has been Lights, Camera, Nonsense, keeping you updated despite our best efforts. Make sure to tune in every 2 weeks for all the latest news, reviews, and how-do-you-dos. Maybe next time we record a podcast, things will be better. Hopefully, they will be better. But thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.